Psalm 100 from the Paleo-Hebrew Scriptures. Make a loud noise. Shout for joy unto Yahweh, the ever-living. Go to him before his face with a ringing cry of joy. Know him intimately and completely, for he, Yahweh, the ever-living, is Elohayim. He has fashioned us, working by labor to produce us, and not we ourselves. We are his people and the small cattle of his pasturing. Go to him, and to his gate with confession, thanksgiving, praise, into his enclosure with hymns of celebration. Cast forth praise unto him, kneel and place a gift before him. Prosper his name. For Yahweh is beautiful, kind, upright, fair and agreeable. His hesed, desire and mercy, zeal and kindness, endure unto time of long duration. For as far as the eye can see or perceive, to the edge of the horizon and beyond, and his faithfulness circles from age to age perpetually.
Is modern Israel legitimate? Are the Jews the people from the Bible? And what about the synagogue of Satan? Who are they? Here to address those questions and more is Andrew Hoy of Project 314. You might be surprised at his answers, so stick around. Andrew is a brilliant and thoughtful man and a strappingly good-looking man. Of course, both, thrice, I suppose, as an engineer and a theologian. I've told him many times in the past that I will not be debating him. This is the guy that read the instructions for the building of the tabernacle in the Torah, the tabernacle in the wilderness, and came up with a brilliant circular or circular-ish, yurtish design rather than a rectangular one. He has gone against all mainstream thought in that area, and I totally back him and support him on that. As a reminder, these panel discussions are intended to establish and discuss different varying ideas. Disclaimer, each week I have been bringing on various different guests which do not necessarily hold the same opinions as my own. They may or may not. Everyone is free to express their own opinion. And the amazing thing is about people is that everybody puts their pants on the same way. In fact, I can guarantee you that tonight's discussion will be very different from what my regular viewers are used to in the history of this channel. So maybe a little trigger warning tonight. The purpose of this discussion is an educational one, a theological one, and of course to better inform you so that you can listen to all sides of the argument and make your own decision. Imagine that, fancy that would actually happen in today's world. Now, before I get into it with you, Andrew, I do want to point out to all my viewers out there that we do have the Tuck Book Club. And the amazing thing about the Tuck Book Club, there's a link under here. You can go subscribe to it. It's a way to support this ministry. And what I love about the Tuck Book Club is that every dollar that you give to this ministry every single month, whether it's $5, $10, $15, $25, $50, $75, $100, $150, we give that exact same amount back every single month in store gift certificates that, we're putting out new books and new authors all the time, bringing in publishing all sorts of stuff, whether it's ancient scripture, worldly mystery type books, or what have you. And of course, the Paleo-Hebrew Scriptures as well, the Torah portion study guides, all sorts of stuff. You can get those for yourself, your friends, study groups, great stuff. And also, if you feel inclined, we have the Paleo-Hebrew Scriptures fundraiser link underneath, and we are on a 10 to 15 year project to get all of the Bible translated through the Paleo-Hebrew. So every single dollar helps on that. Okay, that being said, thank you for being here, Andrew. It is a pleasure having you back. Looking good as always. I guess I'll just ask the first question of the night, and then we can take it from there. And what are the Jews from the Bible? Are the Jews? We'll just go straight to the controversy. Are the Jews the people from the Bible? Andrew, fire away.
Yep. So before I just come in to answer that outright, I guess a little bit of backdrop on this. I really didn't have any experience with Jews for pretty much any of my life, and when I say up until Israel, I ended up going to Israel. First on a vacation, and then later went back to study. But the unfamiliarity, is something that, we get our impression of Jews from, Christian church, at least, people who are, in of the church, whatever, from like New Testament gospels and everything. It's like, oh, it's kind of almost like a Scooby-Doo villain, right? It's like, oh, those, not for those Jews again, So, some of this is carried through into culture and everything like that. So as a fellow conspiracy theorist, I'm always open to hear, the theories on, anything political, etc. And things having to do with actual real world, physics and history and everything like that. So this is kind of the perspective I'm coming at, is like, I came in without any impression, no favor, positive or negative. And developing experience kind of with them and around them and everything. A lot of people, it seems like they jump through this revelation thing a lot, like, the synagogue of Satan, who say they're Jews and they're not, and people will really, more than take that to heart. It's something that they go kind of, I think, sometimes off the rails with. Now, what kind of prompted me to say, hey, oh,
and hold that thought a second. We'll come right back to that. I wanted to say that, speaking of going off the rails, is you and I both, we have many things in common, but one of them is that we both like conspiracy theories, and I happen to love them, and I, love discussing them. I was, one of my concerns, and we were talking about this recently, is that it seems like conspiracy theory now, a lot of it really is going just off the rails. It's just getting wilder and wilder, and there's not a lot to back it up. It's just these claims that are put out there. I remember back in the day, when I got into this, we're talking about things like 9/11 truth. We're talking about, the prick, if I can, say the V word on here, and things like that, things that are actual practical for society and our lives. We're talking about, the Fed, all this, that kind of stuff. And nowadays we're just going off the deep end, making these just wild, I don't even need to go into them all now. And what I'm talking about, Andrew, but I'm hoping that in this conversation that we can do that. We can get a little bit more grounded in just some basic understandings, because it's one of those things where when people say it enough, on the internet, people just start repeating it because it's like they must know what they're talking about, right? Like I've seen this so many times, like you're about to say the synagogue of Satan. You've seen this so many times, so it must be true. And we need to keep pushing this message forward and waking up the world to this message that you just saw 30 times, in the last month on Facebook or what have you. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Sorry. Yeah, but to that point, in getting into this issue of moderation, is kind of where I'm hoping to go. And when I say hoping to go, being a conspiracy theorist, and you see in 9/11, a number of people will blame the Jews for 9/11, Mossad for 9/11, and everything like that. So I just like to begin our little chat here by saying, I am not a deep state denier, if you will. There are conspiracies. There is, what the government does. There's that which the populace is and or does. And then there is, deep state that seems to be, beyond anyone's reach and imagination. And where those lines in the sand are to be drawn is a little bit, murky, I guess, to say the least. Right.
And so you're saying basically that the U.S. has a deep state, but Israel has a deep state as well, correct?
Yeah. And whether or not they're always aligned is a whole nother question too. I use the phrase warring factions of demons. Sometimes you got one going for, viability, trying for more power, of the other one, because, it is a divided kingdom, in that sense.
And I don't know if you saw this because you brought up 9/11. Did you see the JFK papers that came out this last year? And Israel did pop up in there again in some of that stuff. So, there it is again, talking deep state stuff.
Yeah, I really didn't follow that rabbit hole. And the reason I didn't, in part, was, I see it as it's something that's so stale from a vintage standpoint. There's so much redacted content. I remember the first conspiracy, one of the first ones I started studying was Roswell, and it's just like, all right, now I'm supposed to take this redacted document with all the black lines on it and somehow infer some sort of grandiose truth. And after a while, I think there's so much deliberate release of this partial, fractional, disorienting information that at the end of the day, it's like, well, why do you think you're going to get to any truth, from this information, heap or pile? Why would we think that this is a real thing at some point? It gets to be like really consuming time-wise, energy-wise, and you can just dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And after a while, you're just like, you know what? I'm just in a hole, at the end of the day there. So that's my concern with like digging into JFK, and it's like, gets into this whole objective thing. It's like, okay, at the end of the day, then what am I going to do differently? Am I going to vote differently? Am I going to, pick up a sign and go protesting? What am I going to do with that information? So if anything, it's like, well, trust the government a little bit less. I'm all for that, but you don't want to totally demonize the whole thing and the whole system, because it does have a practical value and a practical reason. It's there's the proverb that says, the king's heart is like a water course. He directs it however he pleases, being the Almighty, right? So if you want to pretend that, the Almighty doesn't have his thumb or have his tabs on human government, well, this is where we're mistaken. So, the extent to which he uses these people as puppets sometimes, whether it's for punishment or for help, for our good, there's a mixture of those things. So I choose to see it in that regard. Israel, all those cycles they went through of punishments and like they had wicked kings that were raised up over them, because it's like, all right, you're not obeying and you need a lesson here. So that's the way I kind of see the government tie in or play in on this. So
I mean, I think I've changed my view radically in the last few years. I've stated this a lot, on an understanding that this isn't just Satan in control of everything. People give that guy way too much credit. That God is in control, and Yahshua is King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and that he uses the government for his purposes. But I want to get back on this question as to the Jews. Are they the people from the Bible? Because this comes up a lot, and how one answers this question is going to radically shape maybe even their theology, but just their conspiracy theories, what they do with Israel, the country, the people, all that stuff. So, I guess first, just yes or no, Andrew, are the Jews the people, in your opinion, are they the people of the Bible?
Yes, they are, but which people are they, and who are the Jews? Then you have that other question that follows that, right? So if you say yes, the Jews are people of the Bible, are they the only people of the Bible? This is a question of defining terms. There are what I believe to be Ginos, which is like and Rhino is Republican in name only. Ginos is Jew in name only, right? So you have a number of things. I guess I want to just make one qualifying remark before I fully answer that, and if we can go to that slide that I kind of gave you that screen after that. But October 7th is a case in point, and this is when I started getting really disturbed with when the October 7th thing happened, and then after that, they're saying, oh, October 7th is like the 9/11 for Israel, and it's like, oh, you mean it's fake too? Yes. And I'll say that by saying, with 9/11, there's a lot of anomalies that have happened. For those who haven't studied it, you have the buildings are collapsing to the ground, as fast as gravity will pull them there. And that shouldn't happen if you've got layers of resistance along the way. It's like falling through branches on a tree. If you're a skydiver and thinking that branches aren't going to slow you down, they will slow you down. The question is how much. You'll get to the ground later than someone who's falling right next to you. So that's one case in point from a physics standpoint. It's like, okay, there's something rotten in Denmark. And so when I see the October 7th thing, my spidey senses or what have you start, red flagging up, because I'm like, there's something wrong here, because, Israel's borders are simply not that unsecure. And how do they, manage all this? So here I am basically saying, I think there is, that's a case of deep state. And, is that representative of the totality of all the Jews in Israel? Absolutely not. I don't think at all.
So, I mean, basically, so you're comparing 9/11 to this here, but you're basically saying that 10/7 was like, it should not have happened the way it happened.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It was obviously by design, and that's deep state Israel had to have had a part in that.
Right. And to say that this is like some, conspiracy that's at the grassroots level, like all the Jews are getting together, coming to synagogue and all like plotting this whole thing. It's like, so people need to be very mindful. And that's the one takeaway I want for everyone to have tonight is you have to be mindful before you condemn that country. You really do. And I'll get to that. I've got good evidence for that. I know everyone's starting to think, the Rothschilds founded it, and just the gears, the cogs are starting to stick. The teeth are bumping one over the other on that. But
it becomes a series of slogans, bumper stickers, and almost cultish mottos. I just want to throw this out there real quick to my thoughts on this, because, and we were talking about how I kind of I remember going with that position originally, so, maybe 10 years ago, and that when I was first introduced to the Edomite invasion theory that is talked about all throughout the prophets, that the modern Jews are Edomites that have infiltrated the land. I've since pulled away from that position. I've given this many times. Anyone who read my book that I came out with, the commentary on the Gospel of Peter, the line for line, that I am fully convinced that prophecy was fulfilled in the first century, that the Edomite invasion, that would be Herod and so on and so forth, killed Messiah. Secondly, when, so many people push this idea that the Jews are some other genetic race. And I went with that position at one time too, but I started disproving that in my own mind in just the research I was doing when I was looking into the invasion of the barbarians, the Visigoths or the Vandals or the Goths or whoever in the 4th, 5th, 6th century, as they're moving all across Europe. And I'm looking at all this research of other people who are saying that these are the lost tribes of Israel. And they had very good research showing how the tribes of Israel, they settled all the way down into East Africa, Southeast Africa, and they went up into the north, and they were the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons. And you look at like Sweden and Denmark, just all these places. And so many of these were coming out of the same kind of Baltic, Black Sea region. And then I'm like, well, that's interesting, because the Ashkenazi Jews come from the same region. And so I'm like, I'm sitting there going, how can I claim all these other people groups are the descendants of Israel? You and I might have different views on this, that I think that Europe basically today is just descended from Israel in one form or another. How can I say that all these other groups are Israel, but not this one people group? So I can't disprove that. I can't say that they are not Israel, which is, again, different. And you haven't defined that yet. You will. It is, different. It's one thing to say you're Hebrew or Israel. And then, of course, we know that the Jews are a specific lineage from one of the 12 tribes. So either they are the historical Jews or they're not. I don't really know, but I can't disprove that they're not Israel. So there's that. But anyways, back to you, Andrew.
Yeah,
I wanted to add that clarification right there myself on the question: are they the people of the Bible or not? There's just so much people throw out there I think that because they hear it so many times, they just assume that this is like just proven, this has just been proven time and again, without a reasonable doubt, and they can just use it as a platform.
Absolutely, and you mentioned you mentioned the other tribes there. The the Swede Dan and the Dansmark, and all that. So there's a lot of research that's been done in that. But just so that your viewers understand, and there's a lot of people who don't on this whole thing. The difference between the tribes, the 12 tribes versus the southern two, et cetera. And I'm going to touch on some of that here coming up, because all that's like really, really instrumental. And so the term Jew is used so variably, and people always think that the other person is thinking the term the exact same way that they are, or they don't stop to define terms. So I got this kind of on my little list here. Is Jew an ethnic or national identity? When I say national, that really is the word behind national, nation, is really ethnos. It's ethnicity. So is it all ethnic based? As far as who our modern Jews today are claiming to be, is it a regional or geopolitical designation? Because you got a whole country there, and if you got migrants, immigrants, what have you, now you're starting to have them settle in that region and take on the customs. And so, okay, well, who's done a pedigree dog tag on this person, or a 23andMe or whatever? Is it a cultural thing? So you get into again how wide and far reaching cultures go, as far as look at like Christianity, Christmas, all this stuff. That culture is spilled into atheists and Buddhists in America who say, yeah, Merry Christmas. I mean, there's a lot of spillover in that regard.
Sure.
How is it used biblically? And everyone, this just gets my goat. When people say, yeah, all the Jews came out of Egypt, and it's like, well, yeah, that's very not helpful, because it wasn't just the Jews that were in Egypt. I dare you to find the book of Exodus translated where it says that the Jews came out of Egypt, because it doesn't say that. This is a slang problem. So we've got the biblical qualification where the book of Esther is maybe kind of an exception there. So we also have the concept of covenant and religious commitments. From Judea, and from the Jews in Judah, we have Judaism, right? So now we have the religious thing, and they allow what? Converts. So guess what? Some of the converts that they've taken in, and this is where some of this whole Khazarian thing, that they're all Khazarian converts and everything like that, where people really, keep on going. A lot of people don't know, between the Ashkenazi and the Sephardics, haven't parsed between the two and everything. You've also got the possibility of personal profession or self-identification. And from what I've seen, my experience in Israel, there's people who claim they're Jews, and they have no understanding of the Bible, and it's kind of like, but they wear
I've
their
met them.
identity with such a badge of pride, and it's like really curious. And it's like, have you read the text himself? I'm not talking about Jews that are pushing the Talmud in front of the Torah or anything. I'm just talking about Jews that are that oblivious, and more of those people are along the Reform lines, to be honest. Reform Judaism. They getting into Abraham and Moses. Were they Jews? It's like, no, they came between Judah and Moses was of the tribe of Levi, and so everyone thinks that there's dare I say 12 Jewish tribes, and it's like, that's not true. That's simply not true. So the term is used carelessly, haphazardly, and dare I say very traditionally, and very with strong connotations, and but it's not always used consistently. So that's kind of introducing some of the framework for this Jew thing. But to really understand Jew, we have to think about it in the context of Israel as a whole. You can roll down to the next slide there. You think of Israel, it's like, okay, is it a land of Israel? So to be named after a land, how many people? In Israel, or in the Bible, it's typically the other way around, where the land is named after the people, right? So you got the land of Canaan became the land of Israel.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So we have this question: is Israel also a matter of birth? So getting into this whole, again, ethnic or religious designation, it's like, there's there's not a Jew called Israelite. There's some people within Messianic movements and so forth who like to say, I'm an Israelite, and it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? And it gets into this question. And I brought up on the other side, the covenant problem. And you see that in the New Testament text where they're trying to get the believers circumcised under a realm of Judaism. And that's, I guess, getting into the idea of entering into a blood covenant, with people who you're pledging certain allegiance and doctrines to. And I think it is a relevant distinction. It is a relevant phenomenon that people do it. I'm not saying they ought to do it like that. Not to say I'm trying to undermine circumcision and all the other, Torah stuff, but that's this point of distinction there between, there's religious and then there's covenant. Covenant, you could argue, is a subset of religion, or religion being the child that's following the parent, which is ultimately covenant. And when they convert, if you look at Jewish conversions, they expect you to like just accept it carte blanche. It's like, well, the rabbis will tell you more about oral Torah and everything like that, but if you're going to convert, you have to do it the same way that Israel did at the Mount Sinai. You say, all right, how did they do it at Mount Sinai? And according to them, it's like, well, they were at the bottom and they heard God's voice, and they said to Moses, we'll hear and obey, and we'll do whatever you want. And so they used that as a model rather than as a lesson showing like this is how Israel, they just entered into the covenant blindly, and it's like, I don't really view it in that way. They got, the covenant was elaborated, after they heard it, from the sky, but they also requested a moderator, and they were supposed to be a nation of priests where they were doing the direct go-to. So this whole thing within Judaism, the expectation is like, well, you just have to accept Judaism, and then the rabbis will tell you all the things you need to do along the way. So, and I think there's a real danger in that, obviously. So, but getting into Israel, Israel is a name that was given to Jacob after so you got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? The three main patriarchs in line there. But Yashar and El. Yashar is upright, and El is God. Or you could say Yesh means there is in Hebrew, and then Ra is the idea of seeing, and then El, there is seeing God, or the upright or the straight, arguably before God. So is that what Jacob had become after he had wrestled with God? Because after that, he was not so upright. He was walking crooked from his hip injury or whatever.
Bit of irony there.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't want to cut you off, but one of the questions I know is a lot of people are thinking right now is, every single time you go talking to different channels, you're going to have, different audiences. And do you, Andrew, I mean, here's what some people are thinking right now. They're like, okay, well, that's great. There's this plot of land over there that the elders of Zion and the Rothschilds or whoever has chosen for this the Zionist state, but they'll say that's not even the historical land of Israel. What is your thought on that?
Well, there's a lot of interesting parallels in this. We get into concept of etymology, and there's certain how would I say complementary truths that are possible. Have you ever been to Memphis?
I have.
Egypt?
I have been to the border of Egypt. I have not been to Memphis, Egypt. No.
So I was just going to call you a liar right there, but now just in all, of course you think Memphis because it's Memphis, Tennessee. Of course,
I've been to Graceland. I've been to Graceland. So.
Well, I don't know if there's a Graceland in
Egypt with shag carpet walls,
big long Cadillacs, all that.
Yeah.
Guitars.
Lisa Marie.
Yeah. So this whole thing of is the place in Tennessee no longer is it no longer Memphis because it has borrowed a name from Egyptology, right? So we get this in different places all over. We have all these typologies as well. Look at on the East Coast, you have, or I'm sorry, the West Coast, you've got Priest Lake, Idaho on the north, and then between there and Salt Lake, you got the Colorado River. And what does Israel have? They got on the north, their big watershed, the Galilee, and then going south from that, the Jordan, Yadar. It's the idea of why am I not thinking of this right? The idea of descending, Yerad rather. So you got the Jordan River is a descending river, right? And it's headed down to the Dead Sea, where you got this typology compared Israel to, say, our West Coast. Our West Coast has got what, big huge trees in the Pacific Northwest, right? So what do you have in north of Israel? You got Tyre. No one fells timbers like the Sidonians, and they have great cedars. And so the climate if you compare Israel to Southern California, you got so many likenesses and parallels. And the farther you go north, the more it is like, Northern Israel, Northern California type, reach type thing. And so you've got a number of typologies like this, kind of happening and repeating all over the world. And this is why I think of Jerusalem in that regard. We think of Jerusalem as a capital J, and in a very exclusive sense, like, oh, there can only be one. And it's, Ir is the idea of city, and Salem is from the idea of shalom, the idea of wholeness and peace, city of peace, city of wholeness. And so every time you read the word Jerusalem in your Bible, should we always assume that it's only referring to, when the Jews toast for Passover, they're like, next year in Jerusalem, and then they never go there. But, the idea if it's the city of peace, Bethlehem is Bet Lechem, which is the house of bread. Okay, so why don't they call it the house of bread? Why do they call it Bethlehem with a capital B? It's like we're pulling our English, traditions, linguistic, and we're superimposing them on the text with our own expectations there. Rather than thinking about this Messiah character who came from the house of bread. I am the bread of life, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's just, I think it's better to try to adopt a both and view and ask how many things fit than to try to, ramrod an either or explanation into everything. I personally think that the Middle East, that is the place. It's a locus point. I think there's enough historical witness where this gets to the point of, like, you'd have to be introducing a ridiculous level of conspiracy and rewriting of history to take Israel out of the Middle East, out of that little critical land bridge between, and then you have all the other places, Libya, Kush, Put, Mitzrayim for Northern Africa, and getting into these other these other regions around. You've got the. Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going to jump in here. I don't want to spend too much time on this, and I wanted to ask that question. I will say on my end, because here at Tuck, we look at a lot of different things, and we actually do have a channel, Discord channel, for people to investigate if Israel's in a different location. My position on this has been that this is where I started out saying that I've seen conspiracy theory basically just take a dive off the deep end, where it used to be something like you got to like prove a position. You got to, if you're going to take a position that 2 planes didn't hit the World Trade Center on 9/11, and I don't think any planes did hit it, you got to be able to show, some sort of research to this theory, right? Something that has led you to that conclusion. And
it's called evidence.
Right. So I have yet to see anything close to satisfactory as to how the actual land of Israel is disproven. Several years ago, I was looking into this. One thing I noticed is that, it's easy just to say, like, I'm going to erase all history. History doesn't exist anymore. I can make up whatever I want. Or, they never existed on this plot of land. I just decreed it, and we're going to look for wherever they're at now. But it's another thing to actually prove that they were never there. And as you're saying, the sheer amount of conspiracy that is needed to plant like Jericho there, and all these, Nineveh, all these things is just mind blowing. Interestingly enough, too, even looking at like the location of Eden, people are saying, the Philippines. I've even jumped in this discussion, and I've put, uh, I've proposed different locations. But at the end of the day, when you read the Sumerian text, that there are tens of thousands of these there that haven't even been translated yet, to my understanding, is that they're all pitting Paradise Eden right there where they're at, like not in another Eastern location, but like they are the epicenter right there. So there's just, anyways, all that's to say, I wanted to throw that out there. And, I welcome this discussion with anybody, but I'm still kind of stuck at Israel. Like, oh, and this is another thing too. I noticed that several years ago, there were these different groups out there that they have all these like YouTube channels where they're devoted to South Africa. That was a location. Apparently, it never made sense to me at all. But you would see people saying, "Oh, South Africa, we are proving without a doubt that is ancient Israel." Other people were saying, "Oh, no, it's Ireland and England." And other people were like, "No, it's Spain." I once sat through an entire presentation of someone saying that they had undeniable proof that modern Spain is ancient Israel. And what's interesting is that all these channels, like, they all disappeared. Something happened, and then this new conspiracy came in where now everyone's pushing North America, and all these people have been working at it for 10, 20 years are like, what the? They've all been sidelined. Something's going on with that. But all that being said, I'm still stuck at, like, you got to disprove Egypt, Israel. And as you started to say, Andrew, it's not a matter of just, they make it out like it's just about repositioning Israel and maybe Egypt and Babylon, but it's like, now you got to reposition, you got to take all these place names in these ancient texts and canon, and which you can map out all the distances everywhere from, like Gaul and wherever you look at France, Spain, Egypt, all these locations, hundreds, thousands of place names. And now apparently like England is India and China is Africa. You know what I'm saying? It's like all mixed up and confused. So the conspiracy isn't just that Israel's in a new place. It's that every place is in a new place. And I just find that really, really hard to swallow. But we don't need to spend all night on that. I wanted to cover that because I know that's where some viewers are going to, unless if that is addressed, they'll have a hard time pushing forward.
I come back to that a little bit later on after I make a couple of points, because I think the reasoning of that, the incentivizing of that for that, or that phenomenon, it has an explanation, I guess, and I'll touch on it a little bit later. But you bring up in my mind Carl Sagan, famous Big Bang cosmologist type guy, PBS. And, he used to say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that's really what those people, they don't submit to that expectation. They think that, that relevant criticism is alone a proof, and it serves concurrently as a disproof for the other claim. And you start looking at the number of data points, and after a while, the whole Occam's razor thing has got to take over, right? The best explanation is the simplest and the most obvious type thing. And then this whole thing, the other part gets in, and it's like, everyone's deceived but me. It's like, and I'm saying that, from a very awkward standpoint. And the awkward standpoint is this thing here, the Dome Tabernacle. But I think I offer extraordinary evidence, and I think I can disprove this box. Most people don't realize this because they haven't studied it at any depth. But there's not a single thing on this box thing that I cannot disprove, and there's not a single thing in the text that I do not have correlations with this on. The people making the box are constantly. There's all sorts of variations. You might think on the internet, you type tabernacle and you see all these boxes and see it must be this way, but you start looking at all the devil's in the details. There's all this nuance that people differ on, and it's like, well, if they're differing on, are they really experts? Do they really have it under control, command? No, they do not. And so, I'm making this claim and criticism against these people who are proposing the alternative theories. I got nothing against alternative theories. And I'll usually hear them out like, my discipline, my experience has dictated from this. You gotta hear out, an alternative. But there's a point in time where you say timeout, counterpoint, and then they'll usually get bashful. They'll run away. They'll start to deflect and go ad hom attacks and all that kind of stuff. So red herrings and off subjects, and that's what I find in an argument. It's like you can't stick to the point, can you? It's like I'm still talking about Exodus 26:1, and you're already jumping into this, that, and the other thing, because so it exhausts people if they're trying to argue with me, because I'll just I'll marathon it and but if you can't prove point by point, then and disprove, you got to be able to do both of those things, disprove the other theory and everything. So,
well, one more thing quickly too is, can you define the difference between a Jew versus a Gentile, and also where does Israel come into play? Now, I think you're talking a little bit about that here, about Israel as an ethnic or religious designation. I like to think about, ask, is Israel spiritual or genetic or both? But first, let's cover this really quickly. If anyone's confused, what is the difference between how would you define a Jew versus a Gentile?
Well, let me come to that a little bit later in the thing. Sure. Here, because I've got a few. I've got some build up to that, and we're almost upon it. And so, looking at my question there, what is the relationship between Jews and Israel? So if we start there, that's the important part that everyone glosses over or shrugs their shoulders. And with that, that's the most important part to, I think, educate people, because we're living at a time where I think that this is becoming a very big deal in terms of eschatology, in terms of nation against nation, all those sorts of things, geopolitically, as we're starting to kind of go back to ancient paths, et cetera, et cetera. This is a very important point that, so is every Jew an Israelite, and is every Israelite a Jew or Jewish? Okay. So that's the question I present. And if you draw the whole Venn diagram, and I didn't want to start doing that because that could get kind of messy. You've got 12 tribes of Israel, and Jacob, who got renamed Israel, right? So, that wasn't his biological or his birth name, but that became what he was known by. So he has 12 sons. One of his son's name is Judah. And so we get into this thing, I guess maybe roll into the next thing, because we get in this whole land of Israel type thing. Again, it's not called the land of Jacob. It's not called the land of Judah. But as you see, so this map that you're seeing is a map shown of how the 12 tribes were dispersed in Israel according to tradition and Bible maps. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. I'm not gonna, those show like Zebulun. You see Zebulun there. They show Zebulun is landlocked, but in Jacob's blessing, he talks about Zebulun dealing with ships. And it's like, well, how is it that the little nation of Zebulun there is landlocked between the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea? That just doesn't make any sense to me if that's part of their blessing. But this is a very typical, common. You do have some descriptions in the Torah. We got Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. They're settling east of the Jordan as part of their request, because they were tired of walking around and say, our little ones, we need a place for them to rest. Never mind the rest of the tribes. When you get your inheritance, we want ours right here and right now. And so that's part of that story. So, I think that the map is correct in that it matches the text description here. But this shows how there are 10 tribes of Israel. And you'll see on the south there, right next to the Dead Sea, there is a marking for Judah. Okay. And most people, again, this is following the Egyptian Exodus. So this is, 1400 BC. So that's, along the lines of, let's see, 4,000 years ago, right? And not 4,000, 3,500 years ago. So if you roll down into the next one, So that I guess maybe um, you have to think, if the land of Israel is not defined by Bible text, then what's the basis for it? What's the big deal? Why argue over it, right? So if you're going into this black and white one, this is showing what the land allotment according to the book of Joshua compared to the distinctions in Ezekiel, which are kind of enigmatic. You also had a description in the book of Numbers. Abraham is told in Genesis, where his land's going to be and where his seed is going to be and all that. So, it has a biblical basis. It has descriptions. You can argue over these all you want, and I'm not necessarily here to do that. I'm more about trying to talk about the story of Israel along the way. Well, Israel between the time of the Egyptian Exodus, 1400 plus BC, until 1,000 year BC, this is the time of the judges. And so it was for 4 centuries that the tabernacle was actually in service, and 369 years in Shiloh, according to Jewish tradition, and what it seems to be the case in the Bible text. But if you go to the next slide here, this is showing the reach of Israel under King David and then King Solomon, right? So it seems that during the time of Solomon, they had surrendered some of the territory in the north. Not good. This always, the surrendering of the land of Israel always comes at a bad cost. If you go to the next one, so after the time of Solomon, the people were heavily taxed. You got Jeroboam, Rehoboam, and this is the critical part that I think that everyone is just somehow fast forwarded through the Bible. When I say the Jews, even the Jews, especially the Jews, almost, because they don't want to dwell on this topic. So you got the map on the left shows, Judah to the south and Israel to the north. So the nation of Judah got its name from the patriarch Judah, who came from Israel. So he's one of Israel's tribes. But then you've got the 10 tribes of Israel to the north, or, you could argue where Simeon was placed versus Reuben and Benjamin and all that stuff. I'm not here to, kind of grind all that out, but you do have 2 Bible kingdoms of record in the book of Kings and Chronicles. And that went on for, 400 years. It was 700 some when the northern tribes failed as government and were exiled. And then you had remaining is Judah, where you have Jerusalem it wasn't just the land of Israel, it was more specifically in the tribe of Judah. When you had the tabernacle going, it was actually operating in Ephraim's land in the northern kingdom of Israel. So once it took on that temple, and Solomon's son Rehoboam, who isn't 100% Jewish, might I add, ethnically speaking, and arguably religiously, he was born of an Ammonite wife, and the Ammonites were among the so the Canaanites, or I'm getting confused right now in the moment, between Ammon and Moab, and so I guess I'd have to go back and stare at that again. But the point is he is not 100% of Judah. So Rehoboam is the guy who came in and said, well, you think taxes were bad now, I'm really gonna put a heavy yoke on you guys. And the northern tribe said, enough of this nonsense. And so they went off, started their own system. They got into their idolatry. And so this would be they were the predecessors to some of the later day Samaritans. So, in the time of Messiah, you've got the land of Judea, and Judea there was it's basically a Roman province at that point. You got the Romans had taken over the world. So that's, 500 years between, northern and southern kingdom of Israel, actually 700 years between that. That's a lot of time, right? And Judea. So Judea is the thing that was remaining. And so it wasn't all of Israel. It was just Jews, or largely Jews. Among them, they would also be Levites. There's a lot of people to this day named Cohen, and within, Jewish families, etc. So, this is where the etymology, and you want to tell me that no one came from the tribe of Dan and settled in the land of Judah or Judea at some point. I'm not trying to say it's that homogeneously perfect, But the book of Hosea makes mention of this, where it talks about the northern kingdom, and it says you're not going to know who you are. You're going to forget your, and he, the base of the father said, I'm going to call you not mine, Loami, or Loani. And so this whole idea of you're not of mine. So with them forgetting who they were, you've got Judah is the remaining one. Now, Judah was described in Hosea as being worse than the northern kingdom, but preserved for the sake of David. But later in their history, they also came back and repented, where the northern kingdom did not. And so this is an important, historical distinction. And so you wonder why Judah's, in all different capacities existing to this day. And this is why I so hate listening to all these people say, oh, they're just Ashkenazis, they're not Jews. They say that about every single Jew, and at some point it's like, well, now you're saying the Bible is lying about there are even existing Jews that remained anything, and this is disturbing. You can't then trust the text for anything, because one of the prophecies is unconditionally false, according to them, that there's no Jews left. And of course you have the story of Ezekiel talking about joining the two sticks, right? That the two half houses, the stick of Judah and the stick of Joseph, Ephraim. So you're rejoining those, and it is a prophecy that's, I think, also related to the tabernacle. As far as rejoining the southern house and the northern house, the tabernacle is made in halves, and so you do have a northern Israel, southern Israel. That southern Israel happened to be Judah, and the north was typically named Ephraim, the guy who had the double blessings. So the next slide is really.
I learned something new about the tabernacle every time you come on. I did not know it was joined in two halves.
Oh yeah. It's very deliberate in that regard, and it's very visual. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and so that's what we've had. This separation between, this Jew and dare I say Gentile, but I'll get to that Gentile thing, in a couple more slides. So, I was showing pictures of the land, right? So you can make debates about how the land was more in antiquity, but in more modern times, they've got it, better cartographers, right? They got it mapped out better, from the Turkish, Ottoman Empire, moving forward to the Brits, moving forward to UN involvement, after World War II, and so forth and so on, all the way to arguably 2005. And this question, of whether or not Israel is legitimate as a government, it becomes very, very evident once you start to study this modern history. Okay, this modern history, if you take a look at the four maps on the right hand side, you've got the West Bank, which is the West Bank of the Jordan River. And the settlements that are being built in it, so the Israelis, dare I say the Jews, and let me say this, I guess, before the Brits got involved, before the UN, under Ottoman Empire times, there were still Jews in the land, and there were also Arabs in the land, and they tended to get along because they had worked out their border distinctions. Yeah, there's the skirmishes here and there, but there's never like big political powers that are pushing buttons and stuff. And so a lot of times it's like, taking the jar of the black ants and the red ants and shaking them up, and the ants start fighting each other, not only realizing it's like, hey, it's that guy who's shaking the jar, so that's kind of what I would liken, what has happened with some of the Jews and Arabs, but also as you had Balfour Declaration, and you have migration waves, as well as after World War II. You have Jews coming back, oftentimes very secular, but they're just, whether they're being hated on in Europe, which that was a World War II thing, obviously. And they're like, we just want to go to a place where we're not being picked on, and they had, you want to talk about, a heavy burden to bear, it's like, why would you want to pretend that you're a Jew, in 20th century, Europe with World War II. Why would you admit to being a Jew? They were, kicked around the block. And so when the world figured out, like, okay, well, this Holocaust stuff had gone on, it was partly out of an abundance of sympathy, but I think there's also other agendas for the state, the reformation of the state of Israel. And so
Well,
getting into,
let me just say quick commentary on that.
yeah,
Being a Jew in Europe during World War II times, this last year, my wife and my family, we went to all throughout Europe. We traveled around doing a lot of investigations, and we went out to as far as Poland and to the Czech Republic. And so we actually spent 2 days at Auschwitz investigating that, and we went out as far as Krakow and different places like that. And so we were looking at a lot of like Holocaust movies, and Schindler's List was one of them, and things like that. And my wife had this observation, and it was the same thing. We went to Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam. We were watching like the Diary of Anne Frank movie. My kids read the book, all that stuff. And it started reminding us of COVID. This idea that they were, they would be told, hey, wear a star around to identify yourself. And they started doing it. And my wife had this observation. She's like, oh my God, they played the game. I'm like, yeah, that's what they did. And like, why would you wear a star? Like, why would you do it? Why would you say, yeah, I'm a Jew, I'm going to wear, it's kind of interesting that, the government told them to do it and they did it. Just want to throw that out there, that I think that there was a lot of them that did not play the game, and the outcome could have been very different for them. But that's just the conspiracy theory, the theorizing part of the conspiracy theorist in me. I don't really know, but it just, from what I was looking at, it was like, yeah, it seems like a lot of them played the game.
That's one thing that Christian apologists like to bring up with respect to the proof that, Yeshua was Messiah, that he was Son, that he resurrected, right? The idea that nobody dies for a lie. So if you want to say that all these Jews were content being kicked around the block, getting picked on, getting hated and stuff like that, even though they're not religious, which a good number of them aren't or weren't, why would you do that? Why would you say, yeah, I'm Jewish, come pick on me? That's, why wouldn't you want to absolve yourself of that identity as much and as quick as you can? And interestingly enough, that's part of the birth of the Reform movement. And I was actually in Israel. I was learning in a yeshiva, basically as a Chabad Aish Torah. It's like, kind of above the Wailing Wall. They've got all sorts of birthright Jewish kids coming there, nefesh b'nefesh, all that stuff. And I was listening to them. And first of all, the rabbis, as they were teaching on just general morality, I'm thinking, boy, this stuff sounds awful Pauline like. like I was thinking I was in church almost, because the proximity that it was, as far as close to how all the Paul teachings are. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But the other thing that they were trying to educate these kids on is saying, the Jews of Germany in the 30s and stuff started to kind of surrender their heritage. They wanted to adopt, they wanted the stained glass windows like the Germans had, or like the Lutherans had, whatever. They wanted the organ music and all that kind of stuff. And Orthodoxy is like, no, you can't do that. And the Reform people are like, no, we want to be like the nations. Where have you heard that phrase before? Right. So Reform then ended up getting formulated, from that, birthed from that. And then conservative movement, which is actually, ironically, actually fairly liberal, but is in between Reform Judaism and Orthodox Judaism, is conservative. And they preserved a little bit more in a liturgical sense, but politically they're fairly left leaning, and to the point where they probably voted more against Israel than for it. So you get into these really strange things. It's like, okay, you're Jewish, but you're voting for a president who hates Israel. It's like, what am I missing here? There's something not reconciling. So anyway, that's some of the history. So, part of it was with affluence. And so these earlier Jews were becoming affluent to the point where, like, hey, we can, we can surrender all this Torah morality stuff. And, I bring it up to Jews sometimes, like, if the Torah is true and you have the blessings and curses, how do you explain the Holocaust and try to maintain a position of Jewish victim and innocence exclusively? And, that's something that maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 20 can wrangle with, where they have to admit that they were doing something pretty fundamentally wrong as a society, as a people, to get their host nation to hate them that much, where it ended up as it did, as badly as it did.
I will say this on a side note, Andrew. You don't have to answer this if you don't. Of course, my viewers know that I probably have a very different view of the history of the Holocaust. However, if someone were to tell me, I said this the other night on the narcissist video when I brought a couple authors on who wrote a book on religious narcissism, that if someone were to tell me that they got kicked out of a bar and it's all the bartender's fault, I'm like, okay, I could sympathize with that. I think I can believe you. But as soon as you start finding out that they got kicked out of every bar in town and they're still somehow the victim, I'm kind of thinking maybe there's something you're not telling me.
Right.
Just throw that out there. That's kind of my view on this.
Yeah. And to your point on the Holocaust thing, I haven't thoroughly picked that scab, as far as testing all things in that regard.
That's okay. That's not what we're here for. That's okay.
Well, I just want to kind of mention that. So I'm reluctantly sympathetic to the possibilities that it's something that's not being represented in its fullness. Because whenever they're presenting it, it's only the Jews. Well, it wasn't any Christians who got persecuted with them. No, it was just the Jews. No, they weren't weren't rounding up the retarded or the handicapped or anything. Nope, it was just the Jews. A lot of it starts spinning that way, and it's like, all right, enough of this. And when you start arguing with them, watching a guy like Mark Dice, right? So he brings up a funny remark. He's like, if you disagree with them about your favorite flavor of ice cream, you're an anti-Semite. So it's like they can be sometimes very thin-skinned in that way, but other times they're very remarkably resilient in argument, and I really love them and I respect them for that, because they're willing to consider a lot of things where other religions cannot. They can't bear the questions being thrown at them, and they're pretty resilient in that regard. I really respect that part of them.
My quick thing on World War II and the Holocaust, without people already. I mean, I have public papers on this. People could look it up and see my views, but the thing is that as soon as people hear that you question the capital H Holocaust, they immediately take it into this direction. Aside from calling you an anti-Semite or whatever else, they take in this direction that, like, what are you saying? Like they didn't go to the camps? No, I'm like, no, they went to the camps. Absolutely. I mean, but the thing is I tell people is that World War II sucked on every level. If you were in Europe, either you were running alongside a tank or you were kissing your butt goodbye as they're carpet bombing you. Like it sucked for everybody, like everyone, whether you were in prison or not. It was a terrible time, and all people all across Europe, they all felt it. It wasn't just one people group that had a hard time in prison. But like I said, this isn't, I wasn't intending this to be what I'd rather do is lean into, Andrew, your strengths and your research here, and just hearing, your perspective on this. I don't want to make this about that.
Yeah, I mean that those are healthy discussions. I've met people with tattoos, with the number of tattoos and stuff like that. Older people at like military history gatherings and stuff. So, I'm not trying to discount it altogether. I'm just trying to say what is truth and what is balanced perspective, and are we hearing it? So
absolutely.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, absolutely.
On this map thing that we have up, I just want to point out Gaza. I don't know if you've got a cursor can float over where Gaza is and start in the middle one there.
Right here. No.
Nope, the next middle one to your right.
Right here. Okay.
Yeah. So you see that little thumb for, oh, I'm sorry. You had it.
Right here.
It's, yeah. So that you can see the little yellow thumb for Gaza, above Egypt there, right? And then you've got the 6-Day War, Yom Kippur War. And then, Gaza is basically captured, Israel occupied, etc. And then you see 1995, smattering of other peoples, the Oslo Accords. So I want to bring up this land in particular, from a standpoint of history and prophecy. So Goliath, you remember the story of David and Goliath? He had 5 brothers, right? So they were from Gath and Ashkelon, I think, and a couple other places. But this is all like Gaza Strip region. So there was something, and the text, whether it's Samuel or Kings. I'm trying to think of where that was, or Chronicles perhaps, where it's talking about how they didn't drive out all the Canaanites from the land, and you have Nephilim there, right? You got Nephilim, Goliath, 6 fingers, and giant stature and all that kind of stuff. So this is what Gaza produces in a sense, So you've got this as a very contested area, and you could say similar things with the West Bank, of where all these points of contention are, Mount Hermon and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You got the whole Palestinian territory, what's called Palestinian. So the term Palestine was that's a Roman concoction, where the Romans started using it to call the land that, as I understand, it was to spite the Jews. Why call it Judea when you can call it like Philistine? That was their enemies, is the Philistines, right? And so the fact that they would name it that, and the fact that we've got this resurgence of the name to this day, I think is of relevance. But if you look at the Gaza Strip here, between 67 and 79, you'll see there's no green in it. And then 1995, you get the green thing. So we got Camp David, Accords, Oslo. And this is what I want to get into a little bit. If you roll down to the next slide, we have this. This is a list that I kind of recompiled. This is all me cribbing. Maybe just go one slide farther down, because this is the book that it comes out of. So I want to give this guy, a shout out, and like when I say instant credence, because it is a very interesting book, very compelling book. So a lot of people will bring up Genesis 12, which is the promise of Abraham. I will bless those who bless you, and he who curses you, I will curse, and all that. And a lot of people are saying, well, that's only applying to Abraham. That's not about the Jews, or that's not about Israel and things like that. They'll say that, and they're partially correct in saying that, but it doesn't encapsulate what you see historically speaking. And so if you roll back up a slide there, I've got how would I say? Okay, let me think here. I'm just bringing it so I can read mine out a little better here. Bigger screen font for me. So what this is the 3 colors. We got the yellow, the green, the blue. So you got George Bush Sr. going to Clinton in the green, and then the blue is George W. Right. So this is between 1991 and 2004. And that book actually goes all the way back to World War II, proving that the eye of the hurricane there that they had, it came and settled over a street. I want to say it's in New York or in Washington, D.C. that was actually called Adolf Hitler Street. Okay, this is a street that was dedicated after the name of Adolf Hitler. And it still showed that on property deeds, right? So property deeds are older, and so they renamed it naturally after World War II, or probably during World War II at some point. But that was like, part of that kind of the Nazi stronghold in territory as well as a name. Because obviously, if you're going to name your street, that's like calling something Donald Trump Boulevard if you're in the country of Iran, or if you're in Venezuela, calling something Donald Trump Boulevard. It's like, well, this is a modern figure.
Or in Greenland.
Yeah, or Greenland. Yeah. So if you're celebrating some foreign leader who hasn't even died yet, this is where the people who came up with that street name, that's where they're coming from, right? They were that big of zealots of Hitler, and in Hitler's earlier days, he was probably a little bit more sound, and he was a very pro-nationalist type of guy, and so this is how you get a street named after someone like that. And you had the hurricane, like one of the record hurricanes of the decade or the century or whatever. And you could take barometric pressure readings back then to show where the eye of the storm was and everything. It settled right over Adolf Hitler Street. Okay, interesting point. All right, so this is before Israel's even a state again. But with what else was going on at the time, I don't know. But these tables that I summed up is out of one of the chapters of the book. And they get into a lot of the Oslo Accords. And the reason that I wanted to bring this up the other day, because we were talking about Charlie Kirk and stuff, right? So the theories are going like, okay, Charlie Kirk was killed because of his, he was going to come up again. He started coming against Israel and all that kind of stuff. And I'm kind of like, well, maybe so. Who, I can't disprove it. And I'm equally skeptical of October 7th. So it sounds like Charlie was asking a lot of questions about October 7th and whether he's hitting, dead ends, brick walls, etc. There's lots of hearsay and has been, and I'm not looking to entirely go there, but I'm not trying to say Israel did it or didn't it, but it's worth asking the questions. I'll put it that way. So I'm not trying to blanket and cover everything. Again, like Israel does no wrong and so forth and so on. But this has to do about the land. And the land, it was promised to Abraham and his offspring under covenant. And this is something to not be trifled with. Don't mess with this is the idea.
I want to say quickly, because you mentioned Charlie Kirk. I'm looking at your list here, and this is today, talking to you earlier, but this is the first time that I'm putting this together. You mentioned on January 21st, 1998, Arafat meets Clinton in D.C. Clinton pressures Israel to give away land. And then you tie that in with the Clinton sex scandal outbreak, with Monica Lewinsky. I remember when that happened. The guy who did that was Matt Drudge. And I don't need to give the ethnicity of the man, of who Matt Drudge is. It's pretty apparent to most. So that's kind of interesting right there. So you're making a connection that the sex scandal happens, he's trying to give away the land. It happens. So yeah. So I mean, I'm a humble
regurgitator at this point. None of these things are my observation connections. This is me highlighting bullet points from the book.
From this book, yeah, as America has done to Israel.
So what you have here, Hurricane Andrew tied into, and then that whole perfect storm. Bush calls for Israel trading land for peace at Madrid, and what happens? Nova Scotia, there's a perfect storm develops, smashes New English and damages the Bush home. Okay, so you want to say that W. Bush was only under the thumb of Israel and AIPAC and just go on and on. Whatever theories people have, I don't know. I don't care, because when you start seeing all these pieces of evidence, you cannot just say that. I can't even attribute this all to if you want to go out and say, well, there's weather modification going on, right? So are they modifying the weather? I believe it to be true. Do you think they're coordinating this in the 90s with Yasser Arafat? I kind of doubt it. Okay, so 91, that was with the Bush home. You have Hurricane Andrew hitting Florida and LA in conjunction with the Madrid Peace Conference that met in DC. And going on to the Clinton administration, you can see how aggressive Clinton is in working with Arafat and in favor of Arafat. So you've got Hurricane Emily hits North Carolina. Earthquake of 6.8 magnitude hits the LA area. You've got Arafat on a speaking tour, and you got tornadoes and flooding striking Arkansas, Texas, Tennessee, Ohio, Kentucky, being declared disaster areas.
Something tells me they didn't want Arafat
to say they.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So I mean, that's it. I guess that's the question, right? I mean, because you had already said, whether, and we know that like there are patents for this, that even back in the Vietnam War, that America was trying to basically flood out the Ho Chi Minh Trail, things like that. It didn't actually work at that time overall. But we can go through this whole list here, but is your thought, Andrew, that this is Yah doing this, or is this man doing this with weather modification? There's no wrong answer. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I do believe it's divinely instituted weather, and whether or not he had a man push a button and help him in that. When I say help him, he doesn't need that kind of help. I doubt that he had it's like Pharaoh's magician. Pharaoh had magicians. They worked magic, and they did it at the behest of Pharaoh. Could the Almighty have got had Pharaoh doing it? Well, he hardened Pharaoh's heart, right? And so,
this is a great theological question, because I don't have the answers, right? I can only look at lists like this and go, dang, like there is clearly a connection between these events over here and those over there, and you see it repeated. What I see in the conspiratorial circles is that there's just, again, it's spread around so much that there's not even, you don't even question it. Just like, this is all man-made weather modification. That's it. God has nothing to do with this whatsoever. And that's where I have reservations. I'm like, well, how do you know that? And I'm not asking you this, Andrew. I'm just asking this generally. Like, how does somebody know that God doesn't have a part in these hurricanes or these storms hitting these places? And what side of the equation you take is going to radically shift how you see the world events unfolding. Would you agree with that or disagree?
Absolutely. And yeah. I'm to the point again whether there was quote unquote human intervention, this would be very what's the word for it? Very not only deliberate but very calculated and meticulously planned to have everything go measure for measure. Now, I think divine punishment can come so much more in the form of mystery, where we're not completely like, well, duh, it's like, if something gets struck by lightning, it's like, we kind of have that as a joke, like, oh yeah, that's clear judgment, as if lightning is the only form of judgment only form that judgment can take on, right? Divine judgment.
We have plenty of examples in scripture too, of earthquakes being a sign that there is angelic activity, some sort of battleground going on of ascending or descending as well. So we know that there is a connection to the spiritual realm with this weather. And I've noticed that more and more, because I'm like reading these books like, Jubilees and others and Enoch, where it's just saying that the weather is run by the spiritual realm. And then you see how they're completely taken out of the equation. The spirits are no longer in our weather. They're just standing back in the bleachers watching this happen while, mankind is doing this. So again, I'm not mocking the idea of weather modification, because I'm not saying it does or doesn't exist. And I know it does exist to some degree, but it is what concerns me, taking God out of the equation, as if He's not in control of the world events. He's just seated up there, kind of looking down at the events, kind of just dumbfounded at what, humans are doing. And we're just waiting on Him to intervene at some point in history.
Yeah. There's that Psalm, right? Why do the nations conspire and do, vain thing and plot against His anointed, right? So, I don't know how anyone would defend this many data points, especially with some of the particulars in here. You've got, let's see, November 23rd, Arafat visits Clinton in U.S. with Clinton fundraising for the Palestinian state, right? So what happens? Stock market drops 216 points. And this is when the the Dow wasn't, was probably under 10, so that was a big, drop back then. Today, that's just a sneeze with all the inflation. But, what is 216? Well, that happens to equal 6 times 6 times 6,
Hmm.
So you can say, well, why wasn't it that a tornado came on the time that Clinton did the fundraising? Here you have a little bit more what seems to be a measure for measure, right? And you start to scour through these, and you see that some of these are very much measured moves, and they're things that are increasing amplitude and everything. I mean, altogether, what is this under Clinton? And these are just the ones that that either I found right, that I picked from his book, and or the ones that he found. What exists apart from that. Now you can, if you want to put on this your statistical science hat, be my guest, because what you're going to do, you're going to map out, let's see how many dates we have in the green here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 20 dates or so. And you're gonna say, well, all these weather patterns, we always have hurricanes, and some of these hurricanes are not specific to any event, they just happen. Well, then you can start plotting the ones where there's gay parades or abortion legislation and all that. You plot this on the same set too, and you'd be pretty surprised to see how statistically improbable it is that you have all these events corresponding with one another. And this to me, this testifies, who are the Jews? Well, we got some of them in Israel right now, and they've returned to this promised land. And this is a land that was given under covenant, not to the Philistines, the Palestinians, the Pelishti. They were not the people who got the land. It was not gifted to them. It wasn't gifted to the sons of Ishmael. It wasn't even for Esau, after Esau despised his birthright and said, I'll trade this for a cup of soup. This ends up being, this is the land now of Jacob and his descendants. Okay. And so how does Judah show up in this? And there's a thing in the book of Ezekiel where it says, what does it say? Or is it Isaiah? I think it's Isaiah, where it says that Judah will no longer vex Israel. I'm sorry, will no longer vex Joseph, and Joseph will no longer be jealous of Judah. So you tell me if there's not jealousy motivating these possible northern tribesmen, who are very jealous of Judah. Oh, I don't like the fact that the Jews are his chosen people, or that I'm not Jewish then, and and that the Jews can do whatever they want. And the point of it isn't that they can act with impunity. It's not. But as we start attacking them for no reason, or allying with their allies, etc., you better think twice. And if you're one of these people saying, Israel's just doing genocide against Gaza. Well, you've got people who are squatters on Israel's land, demanding and taking, basically it's land seizure. What would you do if someone came to steal your house? And
now, to be fair, that goes both ways, right? Because I assume you mean the squatters are Palestine, but technically, if the Jews are claiming to be Judah, they are squatting on their brothers' lands as well. We could argue that they're I guess keeping it safe until the rest of Israel returns, but it'll be interesting to see if Judaism as a religion, which comes out of the Pharisee denomination, ultimately, if they will. I'd be curious, Andrew, what your thoughts are. Are they going to give it back? I mean, let's say that if I could prove that I was, I don't know, Naphtali or whatever, just pick a, Reuben, just pick a tribe. Would they, and I'd be like, I want to go back and live in my land inheritance. I could point it out on the map. I'm curious how that would go over.
Well, okay, so apart from like DNA testing or supernatural revelation, in other forms, those are the only real ways. But the other thing is the idea of returning to covenant, or possibly filling up the land for, vacancies. Israel is, as I understand, is one of the most, pricked nations on earth as
Yeah.
far as, and so, how is that going to correspond with unnatural mortality rates, et cetera?
Well,
Um,
this is so a few things on this. I had a question. I totally forgot it now. But so obviously, and this is totally okay because what uh, I'm doing on all these panel shows is just working on your strengths and your point of view. But we're probably very different eschatological positions, which again is okay. Which an eschatological position does, and I think one thing I want to illustrate in this, it does change, how you view about one thing can radically change a whole argument, right? From your position, is Israel, I mean, I'm assuming that if the millennial kingdom, we're looking for this in a future sense, that Israel is going to be like a garden Edenic state. Is that your position?
I do believe in 1,000-year reign. I do believe in extended human life. I'm under the impression that you've got kind of 2/3 dying in Revelation, and a third remaining, a remnant of sorts. So if it's that much of the earth, that I guess is what do you do with those people, I guess, is my point. And if they're the people who are ushering in the messianic age, that's one option. The other
So,
viewpoint, if we're on the back end of it, things like the tabernacle discovery, is something that begs explanation. Or why are we, I've seen a lot of mud floody stuff, and the architecture, and a lot of mystery to that history. And so I'm not super concrete and dogmatic on some of it, but
that's
I can't help but believe that the tabernacle doesn't play a role in some capacity.
yeah,
Uh,
that's really fun. And like I said, eschatological positions, all sorts of things will radically change how we view about something. So is it, but I'm just trying to understand. So is it the position that that there's going to be some sort of divine intervention? I don't know if you would call it a second Exodus or not. There's going to be some sort of divine intervention where Yahuwah personally brings the tribes of Israel back into the physical land.
I do believe that to be the case, and how that corresponds with resurrection, either before or after, I do not know.
Sure.
I That's not a hill I would die on, but I am convinced that the Jews at the time of Yeshua were basically saying, this isn't the guy, because he hasn't regathered all of Israel back together, and this is part of the prophecy. So it was an expectation that all Israel would unite again.
Yeah.
And you could speak of that in virtual terms, theoretical terms, ideological terms, political allegiances, etc. And there I won't go real far, but I mean, I do believe that there would be a return to the land, in the same way that the idea that Judah will go up first when they were returning, when Jacob was returning to the land of Canaan at the time, where you had him, he had 4 camps, one for every mother, between Rachel and Leah, and Zilpah and Bilhah. So you had the 4 different family camps, and the thing of Judah going up first, that camp, because they were the most mature, they also could protect the younger ones that were farther back. So I do, and you see that again in the book of Judges. It says Judah will go up first. So is Judah coming up first here, in the land of Israel? Is that setting the stage for the rest, and for the rest of the ingathering, return to Torah, a messianic era where we're, returning to sacrifice, what have you? That tends to be my leanings.
That's totally fine. So that's totally fine. So would you say that for a lot of individuals that say that maybe they might fall in the position that the Jews aren't the real Jews, or that the land isn't the real land, or maybe they're more of a preterist position and say that, Israel's done with once and for all as a land, that kind of stuff. They might have several different bullet points that lead to their conclusions. What would you say to those that when they look at all this prophecy happening, like 1948, for example, like according to the Masoretic Hebrew timeline, Abraham was born, I believe, was it 1948 years after Adam, and then of course 1948 you have Israel. So you have all these things happening, coming together. And if people were to conclude, if they were to tell you, Andrew, that is just deep state control of the world, they're writing a script to trick you into accepting Zionism, or fill in the blank Noahide laws, go down the list. They're basically creating prophecy, like they're going to create like an antichrist, for example, right? Like the Illuminati card. It's all in the script. They're going to plan this in order to deceive you. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, you get into this whole like nothing is true. This levels of skepticism that are so high off the chart, it becomes impractical to live. And I like to bring up the fact that there's a difference between a mocker and a scoffer. A mocker says, "Oh, look at that fool! He's got such a funny looking nose," or whatever else, and just kind of wanton cruelty. A scoffer is different in that they're like, yeah, as if that could happen, as if that's true, right? Pontius Pilate, like, what is truth? There's just no such thing. And so some of the consequence you get into there is it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. And I was speaking to this. I was wanting to come up to this point, with it, because if the land of Israel spans between Texas and Manitoba, or from South Africa to the Congo, wherever you want to place it, it's speaking to that thing, that land that the Almighty promised to them. Doesn't matter. Everyone's got it wrong. There can't be any truth. We can't know anything because our controllers have destroyed so much of the records and so forth and so on. I mean, it does say in the book of Jeremiah that we would say in the end of days that surely we've inherited lies from our fathers and things in which there's no profit. But the color blue is just still a color blue. And if you want to take out meaning to every single thing, after a while, you don't even have language to depend on. You cannot express truth by means of language, and the scriptures themselves have no testimony at that point. You see the problem?
I love how you I'm not trying to put you in the hot seat, Andrew, but I love how you said the color blue, because there's a conspiracy out there that the color blue did not exist in the ancient world. You could have said any other color, green, purple, whatever. But
did you know that colors? There's a Jew. Okay, he's probably an Ashkenazi Jew. He's an Israeli professor. He is a mechanical engineering professor and a professor of statistical science. He proves that gematria corresponds. He takes the natural log of the gematria of the Hebrew words for colors, and there is a corollary between that and the wavelength of light. Okay, so you want to talk about data points here and colors and truth and so forth and so on. So they can say there's no such thing as blue, but in the meantime, because the Jews with their techelet, we can't know what techelet is, so therefore we're gonna we're just gonna say it doesn't exist, or we'll redefine it.
My big thing is we can know the end from the beginning. I've already started out saying that there was a lot of talk in scripture. I don't even know what your thoughts are on this, but there's a lot of talk about amongst the prophets of the Edomite invasion, which again, I have showed that I think can be proven better than it can today. It can be proven that happened the first century. It started with the Maccabees going forward. But there is nowhere in scripture where it actually says. There's a lot that talks about the regathering, but there's nowhere in scripture that actually says. I have put that challenge out there for people. Can somebody find me a chapter and verse, either in canon, extra biblical books somewhere, where a prophet says that the land of Israel would pick up and move to a new location and nobody would know where it is? And I actually do take issue with that. I mean, because that's the school of Tuck. the unexpected cosmology. This is what I do week after week. I'll go, okay, let's talk about the firmament this week. Let's talk about, what it means in, Rakia, all this kind of stuff. But let's just take 30, 40 passages of scripture from the canon extra biblical book, line them up together and see if we can get a picture from this. Oh, we can, right? I can't get a single verse anywhere. And I've been asking for almost 10 years now, a single passage that says that this would happen. And I'm like, why wouldn't, I would think that this would be a very important issue for God, for Yahweh, and that he would want to tell us, hey, by the way, a day's coming when you're not going to know where the land is anymore. I'm going to just thoroughly hide it from you. Like, no matter what you try, you're going to fumble over it. You're not going to know. Anyways, that being said, I want to get back to this list. And just so we're clear, Andrew, your position is that the Palestinians need to go. Am I correct?
Yeah, I'm not saying kill them all. I'm saying they need to go. And I think that, to pretend that land is given to anyone else, better it is to give it to people who are pretending to be Jews than claiming to be Palestinians.
Fair point.
And I'll bring up the fact that there's also within some of these Palestinian communities, these Arab settlements that are in Israel, there are Arab Jews, I should say Muslim Jews, that are living within these Arab communities, and their history of being Jewish goes back, centuries, whatever. But as it turns out, that some of those people are ethnically Jewish. And to make that kind of claim, it's like, well, that'll infuriate a lot of Jews. But you know who I heard it from? That claim, I heard it from Jews. Okay, there's Jews who are doing special. It's unpopular work, but the guy was going through and doing interviews with all these people with that family heritage. So it goes back into that principle of, by their fruit you will know them. Because don't think that you can prove everything in pedigree from documented. Even the Jews nowadays, it's like, well, they're still relying on 200-year-old records or something like that. And so, no one's gotten, if you look at the genealogy that's listed in Matthew and Luke, those are, pretty clean and pretty long, right? They're pretty complete. How many Jews have been given the privilege of preserving their lineage back 2,000 years? I don't think any of them, as far as in written record, so
I think it's interesting. I personally think it's really interesting that the lineage ends with Yahshua. I don't think we have anything beyond Messiah. Like, you got this lineage going from Adam and Yahshua, and that's it. It ends.
Right.
There's just no certainty beyond that.
Right, and that the point of that, don't fixate on endless, genealogies, etc. And if you get into that serpent seed teaching, that the wheat and the tares, and you have this claim. I know that Abraham's your father, but or that you descend from Abraham, but your father's a devil. How can those things be concurrently true? Well, you've got a maternal lineage in there and a paternal lineage, and so. If they're in a sense half breeds, which is kind of the Genesis 6 themes and all that kind of stuff, it's you better think that there is ethnic relevance to it, and it talks about Abraham and his seed. It doesn't talk about Abraham and his spiritual thoughts or anything like that. It's his, you have the battle of the seeds. It's going on through the whole text, and again and again and again. Circumcision is what? It's a blood covenant circling, the seed, so to speak. So anyway, that's I don't want to go through all those points. Maybe roll down, because we had some of the other points that I wanted to. So you were touching on this whole this Gentile thing. Are there only Jews?
What is it? What is a goy? Yeah.
Yeah. And the term is used very usually condescendingly, not always. Some Jews they've had enough peer pressure, and they have enough empathy where they're not saying, well, all goy are useless. But you have some Jews that are like, I can't wait till the goy are serving me and running around, and they do have eschatologies that are similar to Islam, with that. Some of the Orthodox in Israel, they're just like, and these are not some of the best of Orthodox. some of the Orthodox with the most litter seem to think of the goy coming to serve them in the lowest of states. There's an irony to that, because a lot of times the Jews are really clean. Well, not all of them. And there's that whole, there was that German trope, the dirty Jew. And you were talking about they also said useless eaters back in the day. Well, we have the flip in modern times, the essential eaters, right? I'm sorry, not the essential workers. So you had in World War II, we had to get rid of the useless eaters. And in this last little phase around, it was like, they're essential workers. Because if you have essential workers, what does that mean? You also have non-essential workers. We don't need you. You're of no value to the society. You can hear where that language is going, right? But this goyim concept, so Genesis 35 is really the first and the best representation of where this goyim thing is going. And I want to crank this up here. So Genesis 35:10, and God said to them, "Thy name is Jacob. Thy name shall not be called anymore Jacob, but Israel shall be thy name." And he called his name Israel. 35:11, and God said unto him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings will come out of your loins." And so again, it doesn't say out of your spirit. It's a very physical thing here at the very plain text reading. And what do you have? You have goy and goyim there. So this is it's devolved into derogatory language, and you see the same term being used again in Genesis 48:19. And his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know also become a people, and he shall be great, but truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations." Where is that expression is popular from, right? So this is goyim again, right? If you
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, is it safe to call the Jews the goyim, a goy?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Good question. And you spared me the
I'm going to bring that up the next time the Jews call me a goy. I'll be like, "Well, you're a goy." They'll be like, "What? No, I'm not."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Yes, you are."
Right. So
are you not a nation? You're not a nation? I thought the goy were the nations.
You're not an ethnos. Then ask them why they bless their children like goy. Okay, because what they do is do this Ephraim and Manasseh blessing, because they know that Ephraim and Manasseh have this double portion and very special blessing. And so Jews, liturgically speaking, is part of their services, or for like Sabbath service or whatever, they will sometimes bless their kid. They'll bless them like Ephraim and Manasseh. And it's like, dude, you can't do that. You're Judah. You're Judah. and it's just so ironic. And I like to kind of poke the bear and say, you guys are into replacement theology. You know that, don't you? And I'll call them anti-Joetic sometimes, because they're against Joseph, which gets into the Noahide. But let's go through this definition problem here. So if we look at Strong's, we got H1471. Apparently from the same root, H1465, in the sense of massing, a foreign nation. Okay, you look at that word, foreign nation, hence a Gentile, and figuratively a troop of animals, whatever. So this definition in H1471, this is what's used in the Genesis 35 and 48 we just read above, where that's not talking about a foreign nation, not at all. And so if you're either going to say that the sons of Joseph were going to become a foreign nation, either you're saying that here, or you're saying that, or the definition itself is bunk. And what you see here, go to the Greek 1484, ethnos. Okay, there's ethnos in Greek. Well, just like the word says, it has to do with ethnicity. At the top, I just typed in Gentile etymology. The word Gentile originates from Latin gentilis, meaning of a family or nation. derived from gens. So family, clan, race. And you go to the bottom there, I've got Gentile, gender, genetics, genes, generate, generation, genocide, genitalia, progeny. And have you ever heard of a country called Germany? Or have you ever seen, you might want to germinate yeast, right? So
ironic.
this whole concept of Gentile, and this thing is like a Gentile's a non-Jew, says who? Well, look at even what Google is even telling us the truth. Where I got in the darker blue, it says, and use it in the Bible to translate the Hebrew goy, nation, for non-Jews, evolving to mean anyone not of the Jewish people, or more broadly, a pagan or non-believer. That's how they've spun it. That's how the church has embraced it. And that's how the New Testament backdrop is, because this evolution of Gentile had already devolved first century in that regard, right? So you've got Messiah saying, "I have a people of another a sheep of another fold." You don't know anything about the people of the other fold. You have this don't call this other people group unclean. The book of James is written to what? To the elect, to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. It didn't say to Judah and the Noahides, right? It's like, and this gets into this concept of, when I say replacement theology, this is part of the curse for Ephraim, that Ephraim went so far rogue, and this is the story of the prodigal son. And again, we want to call that story the prodigal son rather than like the righteous father, because the story is about the father who has two sons, right? And the one son's the elder son, the one's the younger one. The younger one is a fool. He goes off and parties up too much, comes back, he's all embarrassed. And the older son, who's still on the property, right? Hint, hint, hint. And he says, "I can't believe you're letting this bum of a brother of mine back on the property.
Yeah.
I can't believe you're allowing that." And he says, "Son, everything that I have is yours. The property is all yours." And the reason he said that is because he took his inheritance, the younger one did. And so we get back into this idea of redemption. He says, "I'm only worthy to come back as a servant." So you were asking the question about Israel, who comes back? I tell you who comes back, between those who are willing to, quite possibly, work their, rework their inheritance, but also coming back as a servant. So this whole, expectation of the goy and of the Gentile, they're used the same in religious traditions, bad religious traditions. And I don't know who's worse at it, the Jews or the Christians, because they both do the same amped up junk. And the Christians make it all about, there is no Jew or Gentile. Well, what does that say? Should we take that to its logical conclusion, or say, yeah, clearly there's these two people distinctions, and they're Jews and I'm a Gentile. You're Gentile. That of which nation? And the people within Christendom, whether they lack the intellectual curiosity, or I've actually found I sometimes I grew up reading the nearly inspired version, right, the NIV, but I've actually found parts in Romans where it's clear that they're translating like Judah for Israel, or some such thing. They're not even consistent making these distinctions between Judah and Israel, and whether
Sure.
Judah is part of Israel, or if this is the Israel that's coming back, that's the lost 10.
Well, that was a completely lost idea to me, Andrew, growing up. It wasn't until that was one of the things that led me to the Torah back in the last decade, when I started realizing that like there's actually like I'm not just a Gentile, that Israel is actually a thing. Israel is actually, and that's one of the questions, of course, I want to lead into, but I want to let you finish your point.
I think that was kind of when I say mostly finished point, I don't
Okay.
remember.
Well, then is for you, is Israel are they genetic, or are they spiritual, or are they both?
Well, why go out of our way spiritualizing it just for the sake of? Okay. Why not begin at the Peshat level, the simple level, where it's talking about Abraham's seed, and then it's going on and talking about Ephraim's seed. It's not talking about their spirits that they're going to leak in and, have a what do you call it? A reincarnated moment where they're taking on spirits of this and that. Now, what's interesting though also is Jacob became Israel. So is the door closed to people who are not genetic? And I've wrestled with that over the course of years, but I've come to more of the opinion that it's the grafting in, but don't let that fact that one can be grafted in. Don't let that become thought of as a primary reality and the primary and the first and only explanation, because the greater explanation is the simplest one of it's ethnic. And it prophesies in the Torah that these nations would be scattered to the four corners of the earth. You have 70 nations in the table of nations, and you got 70 sons of Jacob going into Egypt. Is this a mistake? Why? It's because those people scattered. The Torah will go out from Zion. And that it did in the form of people. So there was blessing that came out through teaching, but I also think blessing through ethnicity. When you start inbreeding and all that kind of stuff, it tends to make the next generation not so smart, and it's epigenetic. Also. So you look at the Jews, they test higher in the whole intelligence thing. They have, they have some boundaries. I'm not even going to say that they're perfect in that. Judah is the first one to take a Canaanite wife of all the 12 tribes, takes a Canaanite wife. And of course, Messiah didn't come through the Canaanite wife, because you've got, the Tamar thing. So Tamar was a natural born, Israelite. And, whereas what happened to the half Canaanites, and you have the same thing going on with Esau. Esau took a Canaanite wife, so there's.
So you're saying that the Jews themselves, they weren't the Jew. Well, Judah, of course, took Canaanite wife, so they weren't pure, is what you were saying. I mean,
I'm saying that his sons. I don't think that line continued, but there is actually a Jewish tradition that reads like this. The rabbis say, that which happens to the forefathers will happen to us. Look at how the Jews will say it's only, Judaism is about the faith of your mother. And the reason they say that is because they had a bunch of women get raped, in the Holocaust and pogroms and so forth. And they didn't want to have those, kind of the bastard kids, raised with a complex all the time, because people were, it would be trash talking them and everything. So this is part, another thing, you can't fake fatherhood, or you can fake fatherhood, but not motherhood. Right. So it's hard to fake a pregnancy, but it's easy to not know who the real father is,
Sure.
So yeah, by the fruits you will know them. In
right. Okay. So I want to just tap into this, because this is really interesting, and this probably does touch a little bit on predestination, a little bit, and this is something that everyone is afraid to talk about because it's so taboo with Calvinism. And yet it seems like all roads kind of lead there. So if I'm understanding you right, Israel is spiritual, but we shouldn't just focus on the grafting in. We are grafted in, right? We are grafted in. All of us are waking up all over the world and realizing our spiritual heritage, and we are choosing to be grafted into Israel through obedience to the Torah, to Yahweh. But
I'm hitting time out on this one.
Okay.
If you're an olive grower and you are about to, your olive tree isn't producing well because it's an old tree, what do? You go out in the wild and you get branches. What kind of branches do you get?
Well, it would be an olive tree that you
wild olive branches. You don't get wild thistle branches. And so those are put into the tree to help rejuvenate and to inspire new growth, new fruit. Right. So my point is it's not any old species, it's olive to olive, which is an interesting corollary.
No, you get one timeout per episode. So I'm glad you waited to the end. You have used your one timeout. You've got about 6 minutes left to go. So no more timeouts. But yeah, okay. So this is what I'm, because I think this is a very profound point, and I want to really dig into this. And I think this is, you probably have a little bit more. It looks like you have a 12th page, but I want to dig into this. So if I'm understanding you right, if we are the people of the book, meaning that if we are choosing to, if Yahweh, and that's of course the paleo, if he is waking us up and he is getting us to call upon his name, it could be Yahuwah, Yahweh, however you guys want to pronounce it, and you're calling upon his name and you're going back to the instructions back of righteousness through the Torah and keeping the commands, there is more of a likelihood that you are, in your example, an olive, correct? Is that what you're saying?
I would argue.
So there's more of a likelihood, if you're a person of the book, that there's more of a likelihood that you are descended from Israel, which I think is a really beautiful thought to think about. And it seems to make sense with scripture, right? I mean, that's the whole idea, that it's, I almost think of in Braveheart, when, what was it? Was it Longshanks, the evil king? And he's like, if we can't like run the Scots out, we will breed them out. Right. We'll breed them out. And, and that king was evil, but in that context, but that's the idea that Yahweh is like, yeah, my people are just I'm going to, in this plan of kicking them out of the land and scattering them to the four corners of the earth, they're going to breed with the rest of the world. And in turn, I will bring my people out of these genes. Good. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much,
I believe that to be very reasonable. And let me add that to twist Calvinism into that real quick for a comment. The thing that with Calvinism that people can't stand is the idea that someone would be chosen. And it always reverts back to this question or problem or criticism, this concept of the injustice of God. So either he's fair or he's not. He creates whoever, whatever, to his liking. He gives free will. So for us to be pointing a finger and say he's not fair, that ends up being very bad theology. And that's where that line of thinking goes. The other thing that I wanted to say apart from that is the Noahide thing. So there's people a lot of Jews promote the idea that, that either you're Jewish or you're a Noahide, which means that you're a son of Noah. And the idea of son of Noah, they teach that, as long as you accept 7 other laws, like, don't murder and don't eat the flesh of a living animal and establish courts of justice. They're a bunch of hokey, short, really ill-conceived summation of the law. They don't even include Sabbath in it. And so some people believe that the Jews are going to, persecute everyone who doesn't abide by this. And the number of Jews that are like big on this, they to some degree, they just want to be served in some way. The rabbis want to be maintaining their position. Could we have another son? Could we have Joseph rise aside Judah? Well, this is not to Judah's liking. It's not to the rabbis' liking. The rabbis also aren't in any hurry to bring back the Cohen as priests, having them head everything up. So the fact is that there's that system out there. And the Noahide system, what it is denial of the fact that there is a brother Joseph, and that there should be reconciliation between the two tribes.
Yeah, it's okay. So, as you know, Andrew, I'm not what I would refer to as a fear porn channel. I'm not dropping videos about you'll never believe what they're about to do and all and just giving people like just reasons to tune in about all the terrible things that the government is doing that goes unchecked and you just move on to the next video and you keep making stuff up. But I've been seeing this fear porn take root for a long time. And Noahide laws, it seems like there's because I don't follow these other channels, and I always figure that every several months there's some popular channel out there that did a new thing on Noahide laws, because I'll see this uptick of all these people coming to me and their concerns about, what the Noahide law. Are you concerned about the Noahide laws? Is that something that you lose sleep about over? Do you think it? I'm stumbling tight. It's getting late. Is that something you think about?
I think about it, and that I argue with Jews about it because I think it's fun. But when I say fun, it's not good. That you shouldn't be quarrelsome as part of a character trait. So, but I like to argue it because it is speaking to this problem of the lost 10 tribes. And as long as they're busy saying that Joseph is dead, right, they can try to get away with as much as they can with the father. Now, I don't see any pattern in evidence of, where there's going to be all sorts of beheadings and so forth and so on because of, you didn't submit to the Noahide doctrine. That outworking of eschatology, I think, is one of the hugest stretches. And I think that the people who are shoving this Noahide laws in your face, sometimes they're just insecure Jews, okay? Because they want people to be like them. It's like if I'm Lutheran and you're Lutheran, oh yeah, okay, so you're thinking about the same things that I do. I'm comfortable with you. If you're a Methodist now, that's scary. What does a Methodist do again? What do I, can I be at peace with you? Can I trust you? And so some of it is just, it's so rooted in insecurity and this sense of belonging. And that's the Jews' way of saying, you're not Christian anymore, and so you're still then under our authority, intellectually and legally and spiritually, etc. And it's the Jews just trying to usurp the rest of the world and to deny, But the flip thing to do is to go back and, rather than like listening to the idiot Jews who are fixated on that, go and find some other Jews and find out how wonderful they are, because that's what I learned in Israel by mistake. When I say by mistake, I went to Israel with some hope of meeting like-minded believers. The whole I want a carbon copy of myself, but only in Israel where they're Jews. And I found the Messianic congregations there to be really they disturbed me in a number of ways, and they were more like Western Christianity than they were, Torah-rooted Hebrew people. And I got invited to one Sabbath with Jews, and from there, it was in a bomb shelter, and it was you have all the men up front, and the men are singing, and it just has such a different vibe. The power of that worship is incredible. You want to hear the Psalms? You've never heard the Psalms until you've heard a congregation of Jews, and men. The power that it's something that'll lift the roof off. And the fact that all of our stuff is a lot more egalitarian and neutered and things like that, you can definitely see the genders come out in more positive ways in that. I had I met a Catholic friend I was staying in an Arab hostel. I met a Catholic friend, and I was starting to do Shabbat, and I was we found a place like where we could overlook the Wailing Wall with I had some bread and some wine and some olives and cheese and all sorts of stuff, and there were a couple of Jews walking by, and I invited them, like, hey, you want so I get talking to these guys, and they're like, hey, you want to go to Maklis? I'm like, well, what's Maklis? I have no idea what Maklis is. And it was a rabbi. Every Erev Shabbat, he would host in his apartment 80 people for dinner. 80 people, perfect strangers, mind you. You could show up at his door, and he would take in as many as he possibly could. And you're sitting on Rubbermaid lawn chairs, and just the folding tables and stuff like that. And his rules were like, you can he had 3 rules: 1, no proselytizing; 2, no speaking ill of Jewish custom, tradition, whatever; and the 3rd, no talking politics. So he had Christians there, he had Arabs there, and I learned the meaning of Shabbat, with kind of in that midst and in that experience. And it wasn't just once. I went back there, when I say multiple times, and I met other Jews along the way, and their inclination to give hospitality is second to none. I've never experienced anything like that from Christians or Messianics, anything near that powerful. And so this is why I go far out of my way to defend Jews, and not only as being legitimate, but just because the deep state of Israel is doing something, I'm not about to pin that one on them and curse the land and saying it's no good and it's all under Rothschild control and this and that. I mean, I don't fixate on that, because that's not representative of the whole, and that's fixating on the negative there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And obviously we want, I want everybody to know, if they've survived this far, that I am not a Zionist. I am not in support of Zionism or the Rothschilds or anything like that. But I do agree with you on this point, Andrew. And I have to give credit where it's due. I've been to Israel twice now. First time I went, I was there for 3 months, living in Beit Jala, which is not in, that's in Palestinian territory. Beit Jala is the suburb of Bethlehem. And it was actually right there on the Valley of Elah where David battled Goliath, right literally on the very spot. I was working on a chicken farm there. To all the money I was raising to work there, I would work for free. They gave me free room and board, but all the money that I raised went to support students that could come. Some of them were Muslim and whoever, to come to a Christian school to be educated there. And I will say this, though, that when the wall was built up and whatever Palestine, I'll leave it to people's own investigation, whether the Jews did it or the Palestinians did it. The Christians were run out. I know that when I was there in 2025, almost 26 years ago now, it was a very safe Christian location, Christians galore everywhere. Of course, maybe it was because I was 19 years old and I had no wife and children and I didn't think about my safety, but I had no problem just going jogging and running up and down the street at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, not a care in the world. I went back in 2000, and that was when Clinton and Arafat were still trying to work it out. Pope John Paul II went there as well at that same time. I remember, though, when I went back in 2006, 6 years later, 20 years ago, wall was up, Christians were gone, gutted out. But I will give this where credit is due, that I didn't really talk to too many Jews in 2000 because I was living with the Palestinians. They were very, very anti-Jewish, perhaps rightly so, perhaps wrongly so. But the Jewish population. So when I went back, I stayed, hung with the Jewish crowd all through, whether it was Galilee or Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or wherever. They were so nice and accommodating everywhere I went. I would have like rabbis packing heat, like with big old like machine guns and stuff. They were coming up to me and they were just, hey, can I buy you some, you want to sit down? And they would like eat lunch with me. And I would just start asking them theological questions and they were happy to answer and talk, and just, they were just I never had a single unpleasant encounter, though I will point this out, Andrew. I did find out that this is a whole different story. I did find out that because I was backpacking through the country for 3 weeks, I went through Jordan into Egypt, and unfortunately on the day that I went into Egypt, a quick story, I crossed the border into Egypt. I got a bus from Jerusalem, went down there to the Red Sea, crossed the border, and then I'm sitting there in the middle of the desert. I wanted to get to the Sinai Mount, the Mount Sinai there, even though we know it's, the real Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia, whatever. I wanted to go there, and I just felt Yah telling me, no, do not advance forward, do not go anywhere. And I just sat there in the middle of the desert, nobody around. I didn't know what to do. And eventually I crossed back over. I went up to Jerusalem. When I got up to Jerusalem, I found out that the town I was going to go and stay at that night, a bomb went off and a bunch of people died. So I think that was Yah protecting me, saying, don't go there. Lo and behold, I found out the Mossad was trailing me for the next 2 weeks. And I look back at this and I see all these bizarre encounters. I'm like, oh my goodness, those were boots on the ground. Mossad was actually, this is how good the security was, by the way. They knew, they were letting me walk around freely in their country, but I was never out of their sight. And they finally came in, they swooped in and they got me on my way out of the country. I had my passport, my plane ticket. I'm at the airport. They swooped in, they grabbed me. They took me to the back room, the one-sided mirror. I had the good cop, bad cop, take off your clothes scenario, all that stuff, all that interrogation for hours. And I finally asked them, I'm like, what do you guys, why are you even asking? Like, what do you guys want? And they finally laid out there. They're like, they told me, okay, we saw you, like you were in Egypt on the day of this bombing. Who did you talk to? Did you carry anything? You know, this kind of stuff. They thought I was in league with them. But anyways, long story short, I was released by Mossad. They did not throw me in Wonderland. But the Jewish people there were very friendly to me, and knowing that I was a Christian, and so I got to give credit where it's due. Don't mess with Mossad, the deep state, but they do have a very, very secure country. So that kind of throws the whole October 7th narrative into serious question, but that's a whole different show right there. We've kind of come up on the time. Andrew, was there anything else you wanted to close with?
Yeah, I guess I just was thinking, Bethlehem was I think it was majority Christian until around Oslo Accord time, where the Palestinian state thing was. On the other side, my most fond memory of Israel is like 2005, the first time I ever went there. I was there for 10 days, and I was basically given a bus plan to take the bus out of the Dead Sea, which is like, a West Banky type thing, which is, Dead Sea is pretty huge, but they have a bunch of spas and things like that. So I get out of the spa. It's December. It's dark. I mean, I could barely see my hand from my face. I had 3 buses pass by. They didn't stop and pick me up. And I'm the only one at the bus stop. It's like 2 hours, right? So I see a bus coming the other way, and it was doing a turnaround in the spa. And I'm like, I don't care where this bus is going. I'm getting on it, because I'm like, this is one of a few times in my life I felt scared. Actually, I was just kind of like, oh my, I am definitely out of my element here. And I got on the bus and explained what happened. And for whatever reason, Israelis around the whole country in the markets and everything are just begging to talk English with you. But the bus drivers, for whatever reason, don't seem to ever speak English. And I was up there with, there must have been 7 or 8 Israelis. They're all arguing with one another. And what they were arguing about is the best way to get me on the bus that I needed to go on. And this left such an impression on me. And it's what you can see from it. Come hell or high water, these Israelis will bicker with one another and everything like that. But at the end of the day, their intentions are in your favor. It's like that's the takeaway that I got out of that story. It's a little bit more elaborate than that, but it was really, it really struck me. It really, these people, I call them friends, and that's why. So buy their fruits, and all these people who, they're just a bunch of, because I'm always trying to refute that. Whenever I hear it, it triggers me, and this is why. So
I'll give you one quick. I have so many stories from over there. There was one though. I said I was backpacking through the country, and for a lot of that is true. At one point though, I decided to I needed to get somewhere really quick. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna get a rental car, and I took it up to Galilee, and I'm going down the road, and I started really getting into the hitchhiker culture, and I was like picking up hitchhikers everywhere, and like I remember seeing these Israeli soldiers on the side of the road. I mean, they were packing heat. And I'm like, should I do this? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And I pulled over. I'm like, get in. And they climbed. I had a whole car full of if there was I don't know, if there was something about to go down, I'm with like some badass soldiers. They had everything in there. And these little 5'2" blonde girls, with all sorts of weapons. It was crazy. That was a lot of fun. Good trip. All right. Well, thank you for coming on with me, Andrew. And of course, we will do this again. I think I stated in the beginning, or maybe I didn't, but this is one of those discussions because I'm trying to do these panel shows and we were talking about this, like, who can we get on a show like this? And I will tell you, Andrew, that because I sent out these mass emails like, hey, who wants to join on, with this discussion? And this was one of those where I had to kind of shoo off several people because they were like the grouchy ladybug. They were coming in and be like, want to fight? They wanted to come in and just like argue with you on this. And I'm like, no. Andrew and I are going to have a perfectly nice, gentlemanly discussion. Just like if we were sitting around the campfire and it just, just talking about, the kind of things we talked about. Let's talk about Israel and the Jews. And I really enjoyed this. I hope everyone did too. I hope this was informative. And if you guys did not, agree with everything, I think one of the things I'd like to do is like, okay, why don't you agree with something? And, is there something that maybe Andrew said tonight that challenges a certain worldview that you're like, huh? And if you adjust that position, maybe some of the other things fall away. I think one of my grievances in the truther movement is that people will die on a hill. They will take a position and they will die there. They will not change their position. And I've changed my position on a lot of things. And, everything that you said tonight, Andrew, I will think about and consider. So thank you for being here. We'll do it again.
Thank you.
If I can turn this off, I'm not sure I can turn it off. Here we go.